so I have to go work somewhere else a lot of times. But no, I love doing what I get to do. And but before I was before I was a youth pastor, I had my dream job, which was an RD here at Anderson University. And so, for those of you who may not have known that, I was in Myers Hall. It was a co-ed dorm at the time. I was a resident director. It fell into my lap. My wife got a job here at Anderson University in admissions, and so she said, "Hey, there's an RD job open at Dunn Hall." I applied for it, did not get it. My buddy Joe Thomas got it, and no relation to the current Thomas that's there. But then Myers Hall opened up, and they said it's co-ed, and would you want it? And I said absolutely. And so I took that job as a resident director in Myers Hall 10 years ago. And so 10 years ago is also when I met Todd. And Todd got to come on staff at Anderson as the campus pastor. And so that's when our relationship began. And I remember we've done a lot of things together. And I remember one time we were at a trip. We went to this, I think it was Anderson or IWU. And they had like these pickled carrots and, just this platter that like I looked at and I just started salivating. And so I remember telling and talking about that, and he goes, "Hey, will you retell that story of you and talking about the food?" I was like, "I was just talking about food." He's like, "Yeah, but the way you talked about it, can you tell this to the rest of the Res Life staff?" And so he's used me and baited me to do things for him many times. And so that was the beginning of it. There was another time where in chapel I got to speak, and he had AC/DC play, the worship team play AC/DC, I believe they're Back in Black or something like that. And he comes out and he's like, "All right, all hailing from Moline, Illinois," and got all this stuff. And so I get out there and I'm like, "Hey guys, it's a really cool." So sorry I let you down on that one. No. And then a few years ago, I got to be on stage as the theme for Anderson University. It was my back. So if you've ever seen a poster that looked like this, it was a picture, that was me. And so I got to have a chapel where I came to life. And Todd and I did this video, and that was a lot of fun. And we did one with actually Joe Thomas, myself, and you, where we got to bring out this treasure chest and talk about what it was like growing up in different diversities. So there's a lot of fun things that we got to do. And then even the latest, I think, before today was I showed up at class. We were just talking about this today. I showed up to class and was his class. I'm not in class anymore, but I had showed up just to say hi. I was passing through Anderson, said, "Hi, Todd, how are you doing?" He goes, "Good, do you want to teach class today?" And I'm like, I went for a bike ride. Sure, why not? So he's always used me for things. And then today he told me there'd be 80 to 100 people in here. And I think he missed the last zero on the, but I love it. He's like, "Hey, sorry. There's like senior thing." And it's like, I don't even care. Like, cause I'm a student pastor. So if kids don't show up because their car broke down or they got a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a driver's license, nobody shows up to youth group. And plus, when I first started in student ministry at Genesis, this was the size of my youth group. So I absolutely love it because I actually get to see your faces or when you look at your phones. And so that's where I like the small groups. And so Todd showed, he sent me an email and sent everybody an email and said, "Here's kind of the theme of what we're looking at. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Absolutely. I don't care what the theme is." But he talked about this idea of unfinished stories of reconciliation. And in the email, it talked about brokenness, pain, struggles, and questions. And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I have all those all the time. Like, I'm perfect. I can talk about that. All I have to say is like, hey, check out my life," which is what I'm going to do today with you. And so I want to share a little bit about my backstory to help you understand kind of what's more recently happening in my life and the chaos that I am walking through and trying to figure out how does God exist in my life right now and in this moment. And so growing up, I'm from Moline, Illinois, homeland of John Deere. So I get made fun of for wearing John Deere stuff because they're like, "You don't look like a farm boy." And I'm like, "Yeah, I am. Yeehaw." And so I don't know if they do that on the farm or not, but I grew up there, Moline, Illinois, and I grew up in a Catholic family. Being Hispanic, that's normally like your default. That's there, and so I grew up with this knowledge that I had to obey God and Christ, but I wasn't exactly sure about this relationship that God calls us to have with Him. And so, but growing up, speaking of relationships, growing up, I had a great family, and I loved my mom, I loved my dad, I loved my older brother, and eventually had a younger sister, and so. when I was about 8 years old, I remember waking up and my mom and my brother talking, and then they came to me and said, "Do you know what happened to your dad?" And I got super excited because this is when Nintendo came out and Mario Brothers was out, and I said, "He saved the princess on Nintendo." And they're like, "No, why would you even say that?" And I'm like, "Because I'm like an 8-year-old boy. That's all I think about right now." And so they're like, "No, he was in a car accident. Your dad is paralyzed from the chest down." And so as an 8-year-old boy, I had to figure out, what does that mean? What does that look like for me? Why would this happen? And so we're a soccer family. And so I'm like, "Well, can you kick a ball around with me anymore?" And they're like, "Absolutely not. Like, he's done. Like, he can't walk. He's paralyzed from the chest down. He barely has movement in his arms." And so as an 8-year-old kid, I tried to figure that out. And what does that look like? And so as he comes out of the hospital in this wheelchair, what does that even mean for my dad? How do I hug him? How do I sit on his lap and everything else? And so trying to figure that out as an 8-year-old boy. And so some years later, my parents divorced. And so I'm trying to figure out, why are they being divorced? Was it something we did as kids? Is it because my dad's in a wheelchair? Is it, I didn't even know what love was, but like, what's going on? And so I'm trying to figure out, why is my dad in a wheelchair? Why are my parents divorced? And where do I fit into this story? Why do I have these hurts? Why do I have these struggles? Some years after that, my older brother, who I absolutely love and look up to, had a child at the age of 16, and so he ended up moving out and becoming a new dad as a 16-year-old. So now I'm the oldest guy in the house living with my mom, and I'm like 10. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do I become a man of the house at this young age? And so there's a lot of questions and chaos that goes on in my life, and without knowing who Christ was, we just lived life and called it normal and tried to put on a happy face. And so a lot of this just formed who I was and keeping, well, so the most important thing that I wanted was a relationship and seeked attention. And I just wanted somebody to wrap their arms around me to say, "I see you, I value you, and I love you." Because Dad was in a wheelchair, trying to figure out, what does that mean as a single man living in a wheelchair. And my mom had found this new freedom of being newly divorced. And my brother now was a dad as a 16-year-old, trying to figure out, how do I become a father as a teenager? And so I'm like, what about me? Who sees me? Who values me? So I did one of two things. One, I got in trouble. So anytime I could see something that would get me attention, I'm like, well, if I did that or was class clown or whatever, I would get attention that way. And so I got attention that way. Or the second one was, I valued sports and athletics. So I was like, well, if I excel in that, then I'll get attention that way. And so I did those two things, and one of them ended up was more healthy than the other. So I got rid of didn't like getting in trouble all the time, because it was going to lead me down a path that I wouldn't be able to come back from. And so as I began to excel in sports and stuff like that, that was happier and healthier. And then eventually in my junior year in high school, after wrestling season, I went to a youth group. I got invited by a girl. And so, of course, as a teenage boy, as a girl asks you to do anything, you just shake your head and you're like, yeah, church, yeah, you going to be there? If you're there, I'm there. And so I went because this girl invited me to church. And at this church, I saw this guy, this youth pastor guy. And to me, he was a priest, because that's all I knew about church, was that a priest was the main guy that taught. And so this priest says, "How you doing? My name's Brett. What's yours?" And I said, "Jose." And he's like, "Oh, very cool. Do you do anything? Are you in any athletics or sports or whatever?" And I go, "Well, I'm a wrestler." And he's like, "Well, I used to wrestle too." And he's maybe 6'2" or something like that, 230. He's a big dude, and I'm, a $135 wet. And so, and I look at this guy and I was like, "I could take you." And he's like, "Well, let's do it right now." And so we're at church in this game room with like these 100 other kids around us. And I'm like, "Well, let's go, man." And so this big guy puts me on my back and throws me down. He's like, "You done?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm done." And so I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. I just wrestled a pastor in a church, and he beat me in wrestling. I was like, yes, and so it was really cool, because I just seeked for this attention for somebody older and wiser to love on me and give me attention, even if it was putting me in my place. And so that began a new journey for me, where I began to come back to church, not because of a relationship with Christ at first, but because of a relationship with the people around me. And that's where I began to learn that the people around me have a huge impact on what my life does, or in the trajectory of where it goes, and what I do and what I don't do, and how I can be healthy or not healthy. And these people around me loved me for who I was, no matter what. And I began to know my youth pastor well. I began to know my youth leaders well, and I began to know my peers really well. And eventually I went to a retreat, and that's where I knew and learned the love of Christ and accepted him as a 17 or 18-year-old boy. And so through that is where I began to learn my journey of Jesus and began to figure out that is with him that I have to build my foundation on. It's with him that I have to continue to read into Scripture and my Bible. And the funny thing is this Bible just a week ago had no front cover or back cover because I got it when I was in high school. And people made fun of me every time I pulled it out because they're like, dude, you got to throw that away. But I'm like, no, because this is important. This is where I learned things from. And in the back of all my Bibles, I put from God, and you can't see it anymore because I taped it. But I had asked Rachel at work, I said, do you have any tape of anything? I'm tired of people making fun of me. And so I had to tape this. But this is what was so key for me growing up, is understanding that I have to be in this word. I have to be in this. If I'm going to learn anything about Christ or Jesus or what I'm called to do, it's because of this. And so I go on to school to become a youth pastor. I went to Judson University in Elgin, Illinois, and decided I want to do for others what was done for me, and that was loving me in a great way and building a community and saying, you know what, you can't do this alone. You absolutely cannot do this alone. And so to skip a few years to present day, my life has always been trying to figure stuff out. I mean, we have our highs, we have our lows, we call them valleys and mountaintop experiences and things like that. And my parents have, my dad's figured out how to be a man in a wheelchair, and he got remarried, and he got remarried 25 years ago. And then my mom has found a guy that she's loving and loves her back, and so that's good. My brother has figured out how to become a dad, and he's actually a father of 3 now, and has been remarried. And so the life that I saw as a little kid that was chaotic began to form into something that was awesome, and everybody was happy up until about a year ago, over this last summer. And so last summer, we came home, and home being in the Quad Cities, and we left our kids there while we went to a conference. Being a youth pastor, I have to go to a lot of conferences, and so I went to a youth conference with our high school students. And when I came back, I got my kids, and that's when things began to seem a little bit weird. And so we brought our kids home, and we started getting phone calls, and my niece calls me up and says, "Can we have a FaceTime with you?" And so I was like, yeah. And so we FaceTime my niece, and that's when I first began to find out that my niece had been molested by her father, my brother, since she had been a teenager. And so in this moment, I had to figure out, was this even real? Was this, like, my mind couldn't figure this out. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. And so I'm FaceTiming my niece, and I had to leave the FaceTime and go outside and kick my trash can over and, and cry and do all of these things just to figure out what's going on. And my wife comes out, and I'm freaking out and trying to calm down, and she's trying to calm me down. And the first things that come out of my mouth was, how do I be a light in this darkness? And normally I probably should have said a cuss word, maybe. I don't know. But God got a hold of me in this chaos and this anger and this confusion and said, no, don't. Everybody's doing that. But you know what they're not doing? Is sharing the love of God in this moment. And for me, it was just this weird thing. And I just kept repeating myself. I'm like, Leanne, how do I be a light in this? How do I show Christ in this moment? And that was hard for me to try to figure out, because that's not what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was go home and fight my brother and ask him, why would you do this to your daughter? How could this happen? What are you even thinking? And so we had to figure that out, and I went home, and I did see my brother, and I had no clue. I drove 6 hours to the Quad Cities, and when I got there, I'm like, I'll just turn around. I'll go back home, and I had no clue what to do, but I saw my brother, and I saw him walk out, and all I did was wrap my arms around him and cry in his arms. And I just had to let him know, I don't agree with you. I don't agree with what you did, but I love you, because that's what Christ would do. And Still to this day, I get confused. I'm trying to figure out where God is in this moment and how God could have something like this. And we're talking about unfinished stories, and this is a story there's not an end to it. I mean, it is fresh still to our family. It is super fresh. When I go home, I used to have to go visit my brother between a piece of glass now on a phone. And I'm trying to figure out, where's God in this? Why does this happen? And then my niece and my sister-in-law have cut off the family. And they're like, we're done talking to you guys. We can't look at you because you remind us of what's happened. And so I'm trying to figure out, where is my part in this? What is going on? Why could something like this even happen to us? So as I looked at the email and said, brokenness, pain, struggles, questions, yeah, I've got those. I can share a little bit about that. And so in December, we're getting excited. Throughout the holidays, December, we got Christmas lights on, our Christmas trees up, and we're excited about life. And so I get a call from my stepmom, and I'm thinking like, hey, when are you coming home for Christmas or anything like that? And she goes, hey, I just want to talk to you and tell you what's going on here at home. I'm like, yeah, what's going on? She goes, well, I'm leaving your dad. You've got to be kidding me. And so after 25 years of marriage, she's going to now leave my father. Which stinks in itself. It's not a celebration in itself, but also to lay that another layer on top of you if you haven't remembered. My father's in a wheelchair, and my father cannot take care of himself. He can't microwave a hot dog on his own or make some mac and cheese. I'm trying to give you some college food items that you might do in your own dorm. But he can't do anything on his own. He can't get himself a drink of water. He can't go to the restroom on his own. And so his wife has been that caretaker. And so now I'm like, you have got to be kidding. Do I have brokenness? Do I have pain? Do I have struggles? Do I have questions? Absolutely. This is all here. And so I'm trying to figure out in this moment, God, where are you? How do you exist? What is going on? Why is my family just all at once just seem to be like, you are done, you are toast. This is not going to happen. And so I began to wrestle with that and struggle with that and pray about it and question it. And I was talking with my wife last night, and I go, babe, I don't know what to share, how to transition out of this stuff, besides the fact that there's two things that I know that hold true in my entire life through knowing Christ and being a Christian. And I said, one, it's I've never been upset with God for the things that humans do. And I think that's something that we always forget, is that God doesn't do this to us. It's the humans, it's the sin nature, it's God's people who choose to say, I'm going to choose this path versus this path. And that's what I got to remember, is that there's lost people and they need to know Christ just as much as I know Christ. And so the other thing is that I've always had people that I've been able to talk to and share with and communicate with and who have wrapped their arms around me, and I've been able to wrap my arms around them. And so I want to share the scripture with you. It's in Colossians chapter 2, starting at 6 through 8, but it says, "Then just as you received Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live in him, rooted and build up in him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness." You know, sometimes in this first verse it just says, just as you received Jesus Christ as Lord, continue to live in him. I think sometimes we accept Christ, but we don't continue to live in him. We think that well, I accepted Christ, life is good, but it says, no, it's a process. Continue to live in him. And then the next part says, rooted and built up in him. I love that part, where it says rooted and built up in him. I'm in my yard this week and last week, and I'm trying to grow grass seed because it's just that season, and we like grass. My goal is to have my kids and myself walk out in the backyard barefoot. That's the goal. Like, I want to just be like, kick your shoes off, kick your socks off, let's go play in the yard barefoot. But I realize it's a process to get grass to grow. Like, I throw the seed out there, and I just want to be like, bam, done. Yes? No. Like, it is a process. And it says rooted. Like, anytime I think of roots, that grass seed, that whatever I plant takes time. I have to nurture it. I have to take care of it. I have to water it. I have to keep the bad stuff out of it and continue to give the good stuff to it. And so the same is with our life, is that we continue to have to grow and be rooted in that and give it the good stuff, not the bad stuff. And so as I talked to my wife, she goes, the one thing is true is that you've always been strong in your faith. You've always known that it's not God, but it's God's people. You've always known that who he is yesterday is the same today and will be the same tomorrow. And she's like, that is so true in your life, that you've been there. And so the other part is this, that she says, the biggest theme in your complete entire life is that you've always had people around you. Now I'm an extrovert to like the max. Like if you're the strengths finder people, I'm a woo. I've taken it like 6 times, and woo is like number 1, 2, and 3. And so I don't know how that has happened, but woo is my number 1. And so I love people, but I also understand that when life is just at my lowest, I've always had to go to people. Even when I don't want to talk to people, I still have to go to people. But the thing is, I just can't go to anyone. I have to go to people who I know are going to hold me up and hold me strong and be able to build into me. And so Wes, come up here, man. I want you to stand right here. And so this is my illustration. I'm a youth pastor, and so I always have to have like some sort of illustration. And so Wes didn't know he was going to be this. I told him I was going to do illustration, but he didn't know that he was going to be my illustration. But Wes, I want you to root your feet into this ground and make sure that Christ is your foundation, that you have a strong, this is a good, strong ground, but I want you to stand there real strong. You feel pretty confident in being stood there? Okay, good. So this is my illustration for you. I'm a youth pastor, and so just reminding yourself that this has to be number 1. This has to be key. It's easy for me as a pastor to say, well, I study the lesson, and I'll give that to my students, so I've read. But there's a time where we have to do personal stuff. And even at school, just because you did homework and you had to write a paper on something from the Bible doesn't mean that was truly your time with God. Make it personal. Make it something that's good, so that when you have a foundation, somebody just can't come and push you over with one finger. Just stand there. And so when we have a strong foundation and we do stuff intentionally, somebody can't come and push us over with one finger. Stand there. So a lot of times we need other people to encourage us and support us and love us. And the second part says this, it says, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of the world rather than on Christ. So we want people that's going to hold us up and be there for us and encourage us in the right way and teach us the right way. And when we're down and out, when we have struggles and pain and things like that they can be there with us and for us always. Because the truth is, my wife said, well, how are you going to wrap it up? What's your bow? And I'm like, it's not a Disney story. I'm still struggling. I still have questions. I still get upset and still trying to figure stuff out. But I have people around me who are going to help me and support me. So can you guys come up and stand next to this guy? And I want you to cross, put your legs between his legs and your arms around his arms and stand next to him. Put your leg in front there. There you go. Yeah, hold that tight. There you go. So this, to me, is my perfect visual of what we're called to do. We're called to be Christians and people through struggles and pain, to be a light in the darkness. And so when I asked my wife, where do I belong in this story? This is the picture I have of people hurting and having questions and saying, you know what, if I'm going to be somebody in my family, I have to grab arms with my family. I have to make sure that they know the foundation is strong. But more importantly, I have to let them know that it's not just about me, but it's about Christ. So when I come and try to push this person over, it's not going to happen, because now there's people there. And even if I come on this side, which seems like a weak side, it's still going to be there. I can't push it over with just one finger, but if I stand alone, it's going to be very easy to fall. But if I stand with people and wrap my arms around Christ and the people around me, so whether or not it's my brother who did something stupid, or whether it's my stepmom who decided to have a new life, or whatever it may be, I can say, you know what, I have people who are going to stand with me and wrap their arms around me. So the question is this: is Christ your foundation? And who are you wrapping your arms around with, and who's going to wrap their arms around you? Because we're not called to do life alone, because chaos is going to happen. Brokenness is going to happen, pain's going to happen, struggles are going to happen, and questions are going to happen. But is Christ going to continue to be your foundation? Because we don't live a life that's got the title Disney on it. It's called reality. And so this is a true picture of what we're called to do. So Thanks, guys. You can have a seat. But I think my Bowie West here is going to wrap us up. But thank you so much for allowing me to come here and talk with you guys and let you know that even in your life, whether you are going into summer, whether you got a job, or whether even today at school you have chaos in your life, don't do it alone and continue to keep Christ in the center.